welcome to Volteface TV. My name is Paul North. I'm the director at Volteface, and in today's show, we're going to be talking about the recent MHRA blog, which caused a lot of chat and discussion online. The blog itself has one of the clunkiest and longest names I've ever seen for a blog. MHRA process for approving manufacturing authorizations or API registrations in relation to unlicensed cannabis-based products or medicinal use. But it does have quite a lot of interesting information in there. To get to the bottom of it and find out what this means for the industry, is it old news? Is it new news? Is it a good sign? Is it a bad sign? I spoke to my good friend, Charlotte Bowyer, who is Head of Advisory Services at Hanway Associates. Let's see what Charlotte had to say and learn a bit more. Charlotte, thanks so much for joining us on today's show.
For sure, great to be here.
So, with regards to this MHRA blog that we've been looking at, is this news or not?
Sure. So, I think this has been MHRA kind of Home Office policy for a while now. I think this is something they kind of first decided to kind of do as a process back in late 2020, and they kind of announced it at a MHRA symposium, 2 years ago. This is, however, I think the first time that they've put this out as kind of public news that's accessible for operators in the industry. Before that, it's been kind of, working with consultants in the industry have known about it. But this is the first time it's kind of is there and it's available for people who are kind of looking at this for the first time to plan their approach. So it's news in the sense that we're kind of making UK cannabis policy a bit more accessible and a bit more formal and a bit easier to understand without having to kind of go through the process and trial and error it all yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of people were talking about it as though this was some brand new development and this changes things. I might have fallen for that by doing a tweet where I'm like, this new MHRA blog is really interesting. So in reality, actually, there's nothing in there that's particularly new. It's more like a clarification of what's already been in place.
I think content-wise, there's nothing in there that is going to come as a sort of a major surprise to people who are potentially going through this pathway. Obviously, there's kind of lots of different ways that people have approached UK cannabis licensing. So there's a number of companies who are kind of figuring out their own licensing routes. Some are doing R&D licensing and then trying to flip that into a commercial license. Some people are doing just cultivation only, and some are kind of doing this integrated, GMP and Home Office licensing. And so I think if you're, in the trenches and you're trying to figure it out, it's probably something you're aware of. But if you're looking at it for the first time, it's definitely really helpful to have this on paper so that you're not wasting regulators' time and you're not wasting your own time and your own money kind of developing a pathway and a process that when you get to the point of licensing, they're going to reject you straight away. So yeah, it's great to have the clarification.
It sounds like that's why they might have done this then, just to avoid some of that time wasting. Is that a sign that there's been a lot of applications going in? You're obviously close to the ground, you do consultancy work in this area, you help companies go through this process. Do you think there's just been quite a lot going to the MHRA?
Yeah, I can imagine that it's a way of trying to save themselves some time. I think definitely, they will be getting quite a few inbounds, and from the sounds of it, they've been a bit frustrated trying to, disentangle applications and trying to figure out what stage of readiness they're at. And so, what the regulators are basically trying to tell you is if you want to do GMP manufacturing as part of your process, you just need to make sure that you are committed. You've basically already got your facility, you've installed your equipment, you're ready to go, you've got your QMS in place. They don't want any kind of early prospective licensing, hoping that you can get a piece of paper and then, do your fundraising and build your facility out after that. So they're definitely trying to make sure that people who are coming to them are really credible and really serious, which does make sense because you don't want to be working with dozens of, cultivators or prospective applicants who get halfway down the process and then realize that they're not going to follow through. So I think it's a good use of resource, and it's if we're going to have limited, people working within an agency, it's good that they're actually reviewing applications that have got a good chance of kind of following through, and it's a good way of making sure that companies are really taking stock of exactly what it is they need to do in order to actually kind of get through the licensing process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do they always have nice little pictures in it, like they've got a chicken and egg? What was that?
Yeah,
I've got it up on the screen.
I took a little screenshot and put that on Slack and was like, great MHRA engagement there.
Yeah, so, thanks for that, guys. So we'll be really trendy and cool, and we'll put a chicken and an egg in as an actual picture.
Yeah, but I actually enjoyed it, so I think that just shows how really cool, the licensing.
Go MHRA. So with regards to just to clarify something then, so with regards to making a GMP product, if you're not making a GMP product and you're just cultivating, nothing, you don't need to apply for a license, right? Or is it a different type of license? Could you just clarify some of that for us?
Sure. And I think this is what's quite interesting, actually, is that we're sort of seeing, with the clarification of this, and the MHRA have kind of put this in their blog as well, you're kind of seeing a sort of a bit of a split in terms of how the licenses are working. So if you are just cultivating cannabis, so you're not doing any of the processing and the manufacturing part, then the MHRA is not involved in that because you're not involving the manufacturing of the medicines. So they've said that's out of our remit, just pure cultivation, nothing to do with us. You need a home office license for that. That's all you need to engage with. And what we've seen in recent years with a couple of people in the UK is the Home Office is now actually at a point where they're kind of considering granting licenses before a facility is necessarily fully built out and everything's in place. So we've seen some companies announce licenses before they've got to that full processing stage. And I think, in that case, the Home Office will be doing things like, say, maybe issuing a license that says, yes, you've got a controlled drug license, but the conditions are you can't have any cannabis plants in place until, we've done a proper inspection and you can prove that you've got the right partners downstream to do the processing for you. And so that's almost kind of, you're able to see licensing earlier in the development stage. And now what you're seeing with the MHRA and the Home Office is if you do want to do that kind of GMP processing, so getting to the point where you're producing a product that's, kind of going into the market or that is GMP, that's where you actually need to have this really joined up approach, and you are expected to basically get your facility up, running, ready to go to do the initial remote inspection from the MHRA, at which point they can say, like, yes, the manufacturing is all okay. Now you can go to the Home Office and kind of do the review and get the approval to put the plants in before you can start manufacturing some batches.
Yeah,
so it's kind of interesting. It's sort of seeing the UK licensing process sort of split off into two pathways. And I think, both regulators are trying to kind of understand and figure out what to do as they go along. It's, obviously a moving piece. Regulators across the world are kind of figuring out how to approach cannabis. And so, I think both agencies are trying to figure out pathways that make sense for them and are going to make sense for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's really useful. And is this sort of a sign then of the MHRA wanting to go down, like, just to make it very clear that this is a pharmaceutical market and iron out some of those tensions and problems that existed? Because there's a lot of commentary on that over this week that, like, this is a sign from the MHRA. You think that's true? I mean, you're nodding, so I'm assuming.
100%. And I think, across Europe, Germany as a whole, medical cannabis sits very much within the kind of traditional pharmaceutical framework. So, cannabis goes through the unlicensed medicines pathway. You need, an unlicensed medicines manufacturing license to be kind of producing these medicines. So it's always been pretty broadly within the pharmaceutical framework. And I think they're just trying to emphasize that very much like this is how you need to treat it. It's not, say, like maybe, markets such as like Canada or the US where you've got kind of different quality controls, that they're expecting you to kind of treat this as a pharmaceutical product, which is what it is. I think what's interesting is the MHRA have indicated that they're going to maybe release some more details on exactly what they mean in terms of which pharmaceutical kind of quality controls and where GMP processes are required, depending on the final cannabis product. And that's something that I think has always been open to interpretation under the current guidelines. I think, like, the GMP manufacturing framework wasn't really, designed for medical cannabis. And so different regulators have been kind of looking at the requirements and understanding where certain obligations fall. And so it sounds like the MHRA that's something they're also kind of engaging with and looking at, what's coming in terms of imports, what's going to be produced in the UK, what the end product for that's going to be, and then, what requirements are going to be in place. And I think that might be something that we see a bit more clarification from the MHRA on in the next couple of months, as they kind of hinted in their blog.
So it sounds like overall this is a positive thing, right? Do you see this a step in the right direction for the industry, rather than them trying to slow down or halt the market? You see this as kind of a good thing in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, given that this has kind of been the process for a couple of years, I think it's really good that they're bringing it out into the open and making it clear to people what the expectations are. I think the UK has never been a particularly easy place to do cannabis licensing, but, I think the case of GW, Jazz Pharma, has proven that it can be, a great place to do cannabis science and to actually launch a proper kind of pharmaceutical thing. And I think as we're seeing more and more companies now kind of going through the licensing process, and we're seeing the first few batches of cannabis getting produced, I think the regulators, they know that this isn't an industry that's going anywhere. And I think that, it's better to have UK quality products where we know exactly what's happening in the supply chain and there's real oversight. I think there's a strong advantage to that and kind of developing a UK industry. And I think there's an acknowledgement from regulators that, like, it isn't going away, and being purely just obstructive about it, I think, is just going to, people would just continue to approach you about it anyway. So you may as well say, like, here's the criteria. It might be stringent, but that's because it's a pharmaceutical product. Here's how we can go about doing it, and here's what we're going to expect of you. So I think, it's a positive development. And I think, we're going to be seeing over the next kind of 12, 18 months, more companies kind of making it through that pathway and starting to really see, like, a genuine kind of manufacturing cannabis industry in the UK.
Yeah, that's great, because one thing a lot of people talk about in the industry, at different layers of the industry, is that need for some UK cultivation.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I guess this could be, do you see in the next few years and the next sort of 5 years, us having more cultivation sites in the UK which can supply that medical market rather than it have, it having to be prepared outside the UK and then kind of brought in? You think this is a sign that we're going in that direction? Because there's not been loads of licenses. There's a lot of people trying to get applications to go through the process, but there's not a lot been. Well, there's no UK company, providing product for the UK market at the moment, right? I know GW have obviously got Sativex Epidiolex, but outside of that, there's no flower product.
Yeah, no, not yet. And I think Celadon are probably the company that are closest to doing that. I think they're running validation batches at the moment. So they're very, very close to kind of getting to that point. And I know they're kind of doing their products through a sort of an innovative clinical trial format as well. So I think, we've got the companies that kind of getting there. I know lots of people are kind of, building out their facility, working on getting their processing in place, or they've got an R&D license and they're looking to kind of convert that soon. So we're definitely, there's lots of companies looking at this. I think there's probably been a bit of churn in terms of people looking and then abandoning certain plans, but it's definitely coming up. And I think we're definitely getting there. And I think, there's a lot of benefits to having a UK supply chain, particularly I think around consistency and the guaranteed timelines. I think for patients, having quite variable supply, not knowing when things are coming in, to the country, and lots of things kind of being outside of the control. I think broadly speaking to, industry operators and distributors within the UK, it would certainly make their life easier if there was a more guaranteed UK source of supply. The UK is a fantastic pharmaceuticals manufacturing powerhouse. We've got a lot of good capabilities here, and MHRA is one of the best kind of like pharmaceutical regulators in the world. So if we can nail a pharmaceutical kind of medicinal cannabis industry, then I think the UK is a good place to do it. It might not be the cheapest, and it's certainly not the easiest. But I think, again, especially if you're kind of looking for advanced product formats or looking to also do clinical trials and partnership, the UK can be a really good place to kind of push that forward.
Definitely. So all in all, pretty positive stuff. Maybe a bit of people maybe jump the gun a little bit in terms of thinking, oh my God, new information. This is new, but really it was just a clarification of existing information rather than brand new.
I mean, it's new information if you're not one of the kind of like small selection of nerds who are doing this already in the sector. So it is good to have that out in the open. And I think one issue that the industry has had like time and time again with the regulators, and particularly the Home Office, is that there will be internal policy that you can't glean just from say reading the regulations or looking at what the legislation says, because that will be quite broad brush, and then exactly how the regulator chooses to enact that, or what restrictions they also want to apply on top of that, isn't always clear. And quite often it's only a case of asking them or applying to do something and then getting pushed back that you realize where those constraints are. So it's definitely great to kind of have some things on paper that people can actually refer to and kind of like approach this in a constructive way.
Great. Charlotte, that was super helpful. You've helped me understand it a lot more. Hopefully people watching have got better clarification. And thanks so much for taking the time out to chat to us on today's show.
Wonderful. Anytime.
So that's what Charlotte had to say. I found that really useful and informative. I hope you have as well. Thanks so much for watching the show. And remember, as always, like and subscribe for more content. We've got lots more to come. See you next time.